Okay, so the questions for Exit West are actually going to be either on 3 concepts, and you can see this in the course outline. Well, actually, there's more than 3 concepts. All right, so all of the questions, we know they're going to have those keywords in them because that's in the unit outline. So, someone asked me earlier if there was anything on attitudes and values. So, attitudes is basically what you think about a topic. So, what you think about refugees, what you think about racism. Okay, when we look at the author's attitude, we sometimes say, what is the author's perspective? So perspective is literally their attitude or value. These terms are interchangeable, so people get really thrown by it. So you know what an attitude is. You know if you've got an attitude, like your attitude towards racism is negative, your attitude towards, refugees, you're probably quite positive and think, we should be more open, we should allow some in. You may share some morals with Hamid, but other morals you may go, well, it's a bit naive to say we'll have an open world. So that's your attitudes, and then we've got his attitudes. His attitudes is, we should be more open, we should share the world. His perspective is the same thing. Perspective is just what he perceives issues and how he perceives issues, okay? So the terms are interchangeable. And then voice is literally how it's conveyed. So if you want to sit there and yell at me, if I was being racist, if you want to yell at me, you use your voice. You tell me what you think. All right, so in the simplest terms, voice, you think, okay, is that how I speak? So how does a text speak? Through language. Through the creation and construction of it. So voice is conveyed through many different things. It's conveyed through the narrators. It's conveyed through the characters' actions. It's conveyed through the language like the symbolism. It's conveyed through the portrayal of the setting. So basically, voice is the medium through which we hear it. So Hamid wants to tell us about his attitude or perspective on the world and refugees. He wants to tell us, hey, there are people out there struggling. There are people just like you and me that deserve a place to be safe. So why does he create characters like Nadia and Saeed? They're so different. They're such different characters. But at the beginning, what do we learn about them? They're young, they're still teens or just out of teenage years. They're at college, which is how they meet. Right? So they share very similar things with us. They seem just like you and me. Then we get the hint, like it says that Nadia is wearing a black robe. And this throws in the idea that, oh, okay, she might be Muslim because she's wearing a black robe. But then immediately, as it says about her black robe, she then throws on a motorbike helmet, jumps on a motorbike, and rides away. So now we start to think, oh, she's not what we expect of a Muslim. She might be just like me. I want to get a motorbike one day. I'm going to go to college. So the construction of Nadia is really deliberate. The construction of her voice, her character's voice, and her character as a whole is done so that we can find similarities to her. Because once you do that, you then have empathy and you think, I want her to have the same life that I do. So you share the attitudes of Hamid. You think, wow, yeah, these people have to escape. We don't want Nadia to stay and get bombed or raped or anything else. We really share that feeling. Saeed, he's a young man. He, does a bit of drugs, has a bit of a party. He's meeting this lovely girl, like he gets a girlfriend. So he's doing things that many of us would do. Not me, no, I'm not talking about that, but But he's, you know, doing things that many people, young people do. So again, we get to know him and we get really close to him. We also get a bit close to his family. So we get, because she doesn't have a family, so we get really close to his family, and we can find connections to him, so that when he loses his mother and when his father stays behind and when he experiences that loss, when the doors close and put them on the other side, we respond with sympathy or empathy, and we really want him to be safe. We really want him to succeed in life. So those characterization techniques, the way they speak, the way they act, the way they're constructed, conveys their voice. That allows us to relate to them, allows us to emote with them and sympathize, and then their voice is heard. It conveys to us. So with these essay plans, I've given you there's voice questions, there's perspective, point of view questions, perspective questions. All right, and then I've said they all cover representation and they all cover context. You cannot study Exit West without knowing the context of the refugee crisis and the wars and struggles in Syria, Iran, and Iraq, and the whole Middle East region. You have to know that context. All right, you have to understand that this is writing about real events, and Hamid is trying to get us to empathize with those people and think they need a place to live. Yep.
How would you describe that voice where he's trying to have us give empathy to his characters? What kind of voice is he?
So his voice comes through the characters. So basically, like, they have the thing called authorial voice, right? But what's really funny, how people separate authorial voice and narrative voice. The author makes the narrative voice. All right. So what we do is we see through the narrative voice of Saeed, perhaps, we can hear, and through Nadia, we can hear aspects of Hamid. So his voice is heard through his characters, how he constructs them.
Yeah. So by describing Nadia and Saeed like he does, as like normal people, all that. So what is he like?
So he makes us relate to his characters and makes us respond to their situation and their voice. So their voice comes out through all of that. They speak to us, they act to us, they dress in a certain way. That voice is conveying his voice. Does that make sense? It is hard sometimes. I think sometimes we complicate it. All right, so all of them we have to do with, you have to understand context, you have to understand things like the refugee crisis. So all of you should be talking about it. And the countries that they list, like, they literally, what he's doing is tracking the influence of the refugee crisis on other countries and the reactions of the nativists there. So we get quite a few voice. So we get the nativist voice, but this is quite key here, your point then, how does Hamid, like, how does his voice come across? So when we hear Nadia and Saeed's voice, right, we hear him through them, we relate to them. We think, you know, this is sad, like, this is terrible, they need a place to stay. But with the nativists, we never get that. The nativist, he doesn't go as close. Remember, I've talked about, it's almost like he uses that psychic distance sort of style. When he's talking about the nativists, they are never one person. They are never, like, so, you know, when I told the story and I said, how would you feel if you came home from school one day and there was a stranger laying in your bed, worn your clothes, showered in your bathroom, and they're like, hey, man, yeah, I just had to escape the war in Syria. I hope you don't mind. I'm going to be living with you from now on. And that was, as a single person, you all go, oh, that's horrible. That would be awful. So he doesn't do that with the nativists. He doesn't give them a face. He doesn't make it one person. He doesn't give them a family or a life or motive. All they are is a collective group, and the narrative style is very distant from them. Okay, and the reason it's distant is because we don't get any of these personal effects. So remember when we talk about persuasive writing, we get close to we get close to characters, we get close to people when they persuasively write, when they give them a life, when they say, I'm a father, I'm a mother, or I'm a child. That makes us connect to them. That makes them a real person. Like, it's a lot harder. So it's same as when we think about online bullying. So imagine you wanted to say something to someone that had been really horrible on Facebook or whatever. On Facebook, you might turn around and go, you're a small person, you're hateful, you're horrid, and I find you despicable. But then if you stood to that person's face and met their family maybe, saw that they went to same school as you, they played the same sport as you, they had a little brother and an older sister like you, the minute you meet that person, you're less likely to turn around and call them a name and verbally attack them, because all of a sudden they've got a life, they've become real. So the nativists never become real. They are always just removed from us. So again, that conveys the author's voice. It conveys his disdain for them. He thinks that they're selfish and greedy in some ways. And he's talking about some of us. He's talking about our sort of, our sort of selfishness and how we, don't want to share the country and so on and so forth. So let's go through the questions. So like I said, I've given you voice questions, perspective questions, and point of view questions. So I didn't write about point of view, but basically point of view is how the perspective is conveyed. Okay, so let's go through the questions. Explore how voice works in at least one text to represent a particular context. So the context is the refugee crisis. How to represent is the convention. So how, represent. And so basically that's your representation is your characters. So everything I've just said then. So how voice works is basically saying, how does the author's voice convey his disdain for nativists? I probably should be putting this in the paragraph. And how does his narrative voice allow us to bond with refugees? And that voice, like I said, is constructed through these character aspects. All right, so voice is not merely about how they speak it. Voice is literally how we hear, how he tells us about his world, about his characters. All right, so the next one, explore how a text uses voice to encourage you to empathize with others outside your own context. This is literally the same question. How voice is all the conventions again. Remember, reader response, encourage you. Now, this is where you can get personal. So remember I was saying, if you've been a migrant, if you've come to another country, if you felt unwelcome, you could actually say, this encourages me as someone that's been unwelcome in another country at times to empathize with these characters who have gone to this land and they're told, we don't want you by the nativists. Their water's cut off, their electricity is cut off. So that's where you focus more on how the nativists treated the others and then how you respond to it. And you don't have to have that association. You don't have to have come from another country. So not saying anyone from Australia can't write about that, but you have to find your connection. So that connection may be the fact that you can relate to Nadia and Saeed being young people that go to college and so on and so forth. You're relating to them that way. You find something in interest. And obviously they are outside your own context because you're not fleeing through a door to escape somewhere. All right, now this one here, discuss the use of voices in Exit West. So because of the plural voices, you have to actually their talk about the different people. So the voices, and I'm going to go down to the paragraph on character for that one to write it in. All right, so we've got Nadia's voice, who is obviously female. She's a rebel from societal norms. She's a risk taker. She's also adaptable, social, progressive, not religious, and all things like that. Okay, so her voice comes out. She also ends up becoming a lesbian, so we get that sort of alternate sexual point of view. We've got Saeed, who is at the beginning is a little bit of a rebel, but he quickly changes. I think she leads him though. She's the one with the magic mushroom. She's the one that has the drugs to smoke. She's the one that leads all of it. She's the one that goes out with him on a date and takes him up to her apartment. He probably wouldn't have considered premarital sex or anything. Yeah. So it's almost like he's not forced, but pressured or peer pressured, you know, like, yeah, good. But then over time, he becomes more traditional. He looks to the past. He accepts his religion more. I should put religious. He also is more family orientated. So she's left her family. She doesn't care, and she never mentions again. Like, she wouldn't even know if they're dead or alive in the country, but she doesn't even seem to have an interest in that. Whereas he is all led by his family. Then you've also got the nativist voice, which we don't get close to. And then you've got other refugees who appear as little vignettes throughout the thing. They're just to pop in. There's like an old man sitting on a bench. There's a guy climbing through a cupboard. There's all these little stories of refugees around the world. So we see it as a world issue. That's the only reason he has all those other stories. He doesn't want, that's why he uses the magical doorways, right? He doesn't want us to go, oh, okay, they're boat people. And he doesn't reference their country. He doesn't want us to go, oh, they're Syrians, they're Iranians, they're, or Persians, sorry, they're from Iraq. He doesn't want us to go, they're Muslim, never mentions the actual religion. He doesn't want us to identify refugees as being one race, one type of people fleeing from one place. And you probably think, why? Well, because people have been horrible about refugees from those countries. People fear them more than other refugees. Because since 9/11, there's been a campaign going on since that time to scare people about Muslims. So he doesn't want to enter that discussion. So the reason we have the input of all these other stories is he's saying this is a world issue. Now, he chooses to write about Muslim characters from Muslim countries because he is one himself. But he wants to show us that this is something that all people are struggling with. All right, so back to the questions. So you have to, if you get plural voices, you have to talk about the fact that he does convey multiple voices, but then you can also say that some are conveyed more than others. And why? Why did he make that choice? Why did he not personalise the nativists? Why did he, and I've just told you why, because he doesn't want us to sympathise. The last question is the same when it says encourage a particular response. So you've how voice is used. Particular response is your response again. And the idea is just an issue. So remember, and it can be any idea, but it can be the idea to an open world or open door policy, idea of share the world, so on and so forth. Oh, it's getting a bit messy in there. All right, going to point of view. Now, point of view, there's different ways you can discuss point of view. Point of view, you can sit there and go, oh, it's in first person or third person. Don't do that. All right, that's like, I'm just talking about a narrative technique. Point of view, it's looking at their point of view on an issue, which is interchangeable for perspective. Okay? So you can prepare an essay on perspective and still talk about their point of view, as long as it's evaluate the way point of view is used in two texts. So we have the point of view of Nadia. We have the point of view of Saeed. We do have like your traditional point of view as in third person omniscient, but we can say that's because we want to hear the thoughts of Saeed, Nadia, other refugees, and the nativists. In this one, you would also talk about, remember how I was talking about the distance. You would talk about how we zoom in to the people that we're supposed to sympathise with. We get facts about their life, their family, they become real people. But then he zooms out and talks about the nativists as a collectivist bunch. So we don't feel sympathy for them because they're standing on the edge of this like blocked off area watching people have no water or electricity. So we're not going to feel sorry for them. Yeah. Hard to tell. He doesn't get very aggressive about them, doesn't have negative points of view. So I would say that he is still trying to be quite reasonable because he doesn't want to alienate a possible audience. I would just
really learn enough about them.
Yeah,
Sympathise or
not really. Like he's trying. They're like the faceless people that collectively like, oh, we don't want refugees.
that's why he calls them the nativists. So he doesn't give them any kind of identity.
He also makes a comment, and if you really carefully read, you'll see that when he's talking about the nativists, he makes comments about skin colour. So in one of the places they go, is it Greece at the beginning?
In London, when they move from the dark to the light, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah,
So
but
it was light?
But no, he makes a comment about the kids playing on the foreshore in one of the places that they escaped to. And he says the kids playing and they with a range of tea-dipped skin. So he's basically like, people say mocha-coloured, coffee-coloured skin or tea-coloured. So what he's saying is while the adults were back from the shore watching and separate, the kids were all playing together. So he makes this comment in the text about, kids. And what he's saying is that the world is changing. You no longer, so if a bunch of you, when you were 5, if you're all in a room together, we'd say, oh, the room was filled with a multitude of shades. And if you guys weren't racist, but racist parents watching from the sidelines, that's what the comment is saying is that, kids just play and they don't care what colours the skin are. They just all mix and mingle. And that's his idea of an ideal world. Like there is this tiny little part in the novel, I think it is when they first moved to Greece, and he basically, that's his ideal, is that people would just play and get along together no matter what you look like.
The one who said children would climb and play among the flowers like little monkeys, but not say that they are monkeys because of what their colour and skin.
Yeah. What's the whole quote? Can you read it?
It says, children would climb and play among the flowers like little monkeys, not because to be dark is to be a monkey like though that has been slurred, but because people are monkeys who have forgotten they are monkeys and they've lost respect for who they are, where they're born.
Yep. Yeah, so that's a bit there where he talks about, so the reference of children, that's the only reference of children, I think, throughout. There's not a lot of reference of children, which you would think he would, but anyway. All right, moving on to the next. So you guys are going to decide today what type of question you're going to answer. And like I said, they're interchangeable. If you prepare a question on perspective, you should be able to answer a question on voice. If you prepare an answer on attitudes and values, you should be able to answer a question on perspective or voice, because they're all interchangeable terms. It's just the way you word it. Last one, I'll go through the perspective ones. Discuss the way in which your understanding of context has influenced your interpretation of perspectives in at least one text. Now, this is a difficult one, all right, because it says your, so you think, oh, is this personal response? But it's your understanding of context. Like you have to understand the world refugee crisis and then say, this has made me sympathise with the perspective, the author's perspective on refugees. So discuss the ways the conventions and perspectives is basically, if I rephrase this in a really simple way, Where have I gone? I always do this. There. Discuss how your understanding of the world refugee crisis this is such messy writing, sorry. To Hamid's views on... Okay, so if I put that in plain English, probably not as simple as you'd like it. Discuss how your understanding of the world refugee crisis influences your response to Hamid's views on an open world. So how do you respond? Like, you can say, I know that the world is in crisis. I know that this is a problem that needs to be solved. So I know that there has to be a solution. That makes me respond to his solution in a positive way or however. All right, you're responding to his suggestion that we just all have an open world. So you can disagree. You can say, I understand the world refugee crisis. I understand that people need to go somewhere, but I believe that his response, his perspective on it is naive. You cannot just have everyone goes everywhere. All right, nearly finished, guys. I know you're not used to me talking for so long. Explain how at least one text uses genre conventions to present a particular perspective or perspectives on an issue. So this is basically saying, how does the text work? So you're going to talk about character, setting, symbolism, all the rest of it, and to convey the particular perspective on refugees or open world. Yeah, you could sit there and say, to present an attitude towards an issue. Remember, perspective is just how they're conveying the attitude. But perspective is their perspective on an issue is their attitude to an issue. So it's the same thing. So you could interchange those words throughout your essay. They're almost like synonyms, aren't they?
Yeah, values create attitudes.
Yeah. What you value, like you value your family, so you want your family to be safe. Yeah. Last one, discuss how authors can use text to convey complex perspectives about the world. So again, your genre conventions and the author's view or attitude towards it.